call to order the May 2020 Finance Committee meeting. Due to the declaration of a state of emergency, all committee members are participating virtually. For the record, I am sitting in the committee conference room. In here is the city secretary, the city attorney, and Meredith Martin. All the other city staff folks are participating remotely, and I have a screen in front of me as well. I do see present Councilmember Adams and Councilmember McIntosh, so our committee is here. I also see Councilmember Scipio and Councilperson Member Larson. Are there any other council members out there that I need to know about?
Mr. Chairman, this Alan joins. I'm on.
Okay, Alan, you're on too.
And James Taylor's here as well.
James, thank you. Oh, yeah. Dee Dee and Jeff, why don't you announce yourselves also?
Dee Dee Adams.
Jeff McIntosh.
Okay.
And Mr. Chairman, I don't know if you heard me, but James Taylor's here as well.
We got you, James. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, as usual, we will start with the consent items. Are there any consent items? Ms. Adams, do you have any consent items?
Yes, C4, C5, and C10, please.
4, 5, and 10. Mr. McIntosh, any?
None for me.
Move for approval of the balance.
Mr. Chairman?
Wait a minute, haven't finished. Ms. Scipio, you got any?
No, sir.
Larson?
C1, please.
Mr. Taylor? You got any?
None at this time.
Okay, Alan, you got any?
I'm good, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, can I get a motion on the balance, please?
Move for approval of the balance of the consent agenda.
Second, McIntosh.
We have a motion by Adams, a second by McIntosh, and I will do a roll call on the vote. Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. McIntosh?
Aye.
Mr. Clark? Yes. So that is approved. We now have 5 items, and I will go numerically. We will start with C1. If the secretary please read that one.
Item C1, resolution authorizing acquisition of a vacant lot at 701 Salem Avenue for construction of the city yard stormwater retention pond expansion project located in the East Ward.
Mr. Larson, I think you asked for this one.
Yes, could I have a little explanation as to the need for why we're acquiring this for a pond when there's a pond behind the credit union currently that is handling runoff?
Okay, whatever staff member wants to take that, Scotty. Damon, is that you?
It is not me. Either Mr. Taylor or Mr. Bjorling, or potentially Robert Prestwood may know.
Are any of those people available?
This is Robert Prestwood. I do not have any information on that.
All right, can we get some information or be sure someone is available Monday night to answer Mr. Larson's questions?
Yes, sir. And if Mr. Larson would like to email me what his question is, we can get that answer for him specifically beforehand, and then we'll present to the entire council on Monday.
John, did you hear that?
Yes, I heard that.
Okay. Would you feel comfortable moving this forward without the information?
I'd rather these things, I don't think this is time sensitive, is it?
Is it, Ms. Garrett, is this time sensitive? Let me say this. Can I get a motion to move it forward without recommendation? That way we can get the information at the meeting itself.
Move for approval.
Yeah.
Thank you. Can I get a second on that?
Second, McIntosh.
We have a motion to approve without recommendation by Adams, a second by McIntosh. I will now roll call. Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. McIntosh?
Aye.
Mr. Clark? Aye. So that is approved 3-0 to move forward without a recommendation. We will now go to C4. If the secretary could please read this one, please.
Item C4, consideration of items regarding acceptance of CARES Act grant funds and execution agreements with local homeless service provider agencies. Resolution authorizing acceptance of CARES Act grant funds and execution of agreements with local homeless service provider agencies, and ordinance amending project budget ordinance for the city of year 2019-2020.
Ms. Adams, I believe you requested this one.
Yes. What I'm looking for, staff, is again, if they could provide a short presentation of what this is. I feel like every time now, particularly when we have COVID funds coming from the federal government or the state, we should be presenting something, a short presentation to the listening audience or the news people, the press that are listening. And I'd also like to ask Ms. Newman or Ms. Logan Ford, will there be a list of providers, and will the council have an opportunity to review the submittals, much like the COVID fund relief that we did?
Ms. Ford, who is out there would like to take this?
I would like to ask Ms. Newman if she would provide a presentation on the item and also update the committee regarding the proposals that were received from the continuum of care members on how the dollars would be used.
Okay, Ms. Newman, you have the floor.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, Chairman Clark, members of the committee, and additional council members. I'm Martha Newman, Community Development Director, and this item is specifically designed to allocate monies that come from HUD in support of homeless services. And so what we have is $660,748 in ESG COVID funds. And we've also been notified that we will be receiving an allocation of $1,300,830 in CDBG COVID funds as well. At this point, we have received guidance on the ability to expend the ESG portion, but we have not yet received guidance on how to deploy the CDBG funds. However, supporting services in connection with ending homelessness is an eligible activity under CDBG funds. And so as part of the long-term strategy that we have proposed to address some of the homeless issues in Winston-Salem, especially those that have come to the forefront in light of COVID, we have proposed using a portion of the CDBG funds to kind of supplement the ESG funds. I'm sorry for all of the acronyms, but that portion of the CDBG funds is really going to be directed more towards helping people attain permanent housing, either once they exit the existing shelter that they're in or the shelter that we have stood up for those folks who may be at risk of a poor outcome were they to contract COVID. Right now, we are in the process of having the continuum of care review the applications that have been submitted for a recommendation to council on how to deploy the funds based on the governance charter for the continuum of care, or the COC. It has a very detailed process of steps that you employ. It starts with a rating panel, and then it's another particular group, and then ultimately the Commission on Homelessness all have to lay eyes on the proposals, and staff gives guidance on what makes the most sense. At this juncture, the proposals that came in and that were rated this past Friday focused on a combination of case management services in support of helping people to find permanent housing, as well as other direct financial support to divert people from homelessness or prevent homelessness if they're in risk or at risk of losing their homes. It is expected that the final recommendation by the commission will be tomorrow at around 1:30 or 2 o'clock. And so it is our hope to have that information in a format where we can report out both tomorrow at the Community Development, Housing and General Government Committee, as well as to the full council next Monday. Preliminarily, it looks as though the funds will be divided in basically two tranches. One will be direct for housing services in terms of counseling for case management. And then the other will be a pool of funds rather than direct allocations to individual organizations. And then as services are needed to support individuals experiencing homelessness, then that fund will be tapped, and it is proposed that that fund be placed at United Way. And so the only direct funding that may go to any agency at this juncture would be for case management services.
Is it, Mr. Chair?
Go ahead. You get the floor.
Possible, and I don't know whether the city manager going forward at this point, that we receive a report, doesn't have to be every week, but a report as to what monies we are receiving for COVID, and from the federal and the state side and the county side, and what monies are we expending from the city side or contributing. I'd like to see that. I think that would be very good for the council to see it as well.
Okay. I have a question on this, please. Later on, I think it's G1 or one of those, we're going to have a discussion on the renting the hotel to house the homeless. Can these funds be used for that purpose?
No, sir, they cannot. At this point, the funds that would be used for housing at the shelter that we stood up, those funds would be reimbursed by FEMA. FEMA cannot reimburse federal funds. So these funds are already federal funds, the ESG dollars and the CDBG. And so these will help to expand on our ability to move people into permanent housing. So the medically fragile shelter are going to be used or funded by local dollars, and those dollars will be reimbursed by FEMA.
Well, let me reword the question. Does it not qualify, or is it a case we do not want to use federal dollars because we want to be reimbursed by FEMA? If FEMA doesn't reimburse us for the hotel, where are we going to get the money from? And does this in fact qualify?
Yes, these services are consistent with what these funds are used for. However, the ability to provide long-term support, we would lose that opportunity if we deployed these dollars for the medically fragile shelter rather than giving direct services, be it case management services or financial support to either prevent homelessness or to move people out of homelessness. That would just reduce that ability to really get people to a long-term solution.
Okay, well, I guess the question, and I'll wait till we get to G1 to ask it again, that if we do not get FEMA, then where else are we going to get it other than the general fund? But we'll wait till we get to G1 on that. Any other comments on C4?
All right, Mr. Chairman, John Larson.
Yes.
So in summary, I understand it. We've allocated part of the money, and we're holding 200,000 currently, and that 700,000. Excuse me, 700,000 is currently unallocated.
No, sir. None of the funds have been allocated to date at all. That's why we're here today, to start the process of being able to allocate the dollars.
Right.
But no funds have been allocated to date.
So if we pay out there's still 1.3 million in CBG money. Is that right? That's unallocated in this.
So
if we follow what's being proposed today, we're spending out the front end, which is whatever it is, the 660,000 is being directed today. But the other 1.3 million, whatever, is not being directed today.
No, sir. 660,750 from ESG plus 299,000 from the CDBG together, which would leave 1.1 million to be allocated. Yes, sir.
Are you kidding?
And so we would have the discretion, if we don't get the 700,000 from FEMA, to reallocate that money.
That is at your discretion, sir.
Thank you.
Okay. So if you add the two together, the 660 and the 1.3, it's roughly 2 million, and allocating 960 of that, which leaves roughly 1.1 million to be allocated at a future date. And if I'm heard correctly, we're going to get some recommendations back from the continuum of care group on where those funds could be used. And they're meeting sometime between now and our next meeting.
Yes, sir. They started meeting last Friday. There was a meeting today with the next step of the process, and then the final meeting will be tomorrow around the noon hour.
Okay, thank you. Dee Dee?
Yes, thank you. I'd like to ask a question before I put a motion on the floor. Ms. Newman, do we have the ability, if we wanted to change the decision or of the allocations of the continuum of care?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. I move that we approve resolution, consent item C4.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion to move item C4 forward. I will poll the board, the committee members. Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. McIntosh?
Aye.
Mr. Clark, yes. C4 is approved. I cannot remember, I had C7 pulled for me, and I don't know if I mentioned it or not, but I will pull it now. If the secretary please read C7.
C5.
C5. I'm sorry. C5.
Item C5, resolution awarding purchase order for bus stop shelters and amenities.
Ms. Adams, I believe this is yours also.
Yes. Is
Go
it?
ahead.
Well, I saw that we have about 50 locations in phase one. If staff could again give a small snapshot of what C5 is with the shelters. And I'd like to know, is it possible for us to see the complete list?
Okay. Which staff director? Who would like to comment on this? Tanika, you out there?
Pardon me? This is Tanika McCullough.
You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Just briefly, the bus shelter purchase is an item to purchase the parts and pieces for approximately 100 bus shelters to be placed along the Worcester routes. This item is just for the purchase of the shelter. We will either do a change order for the existing company that we had installing the shelters in phase one, or we will need to go through the process to hire someone else to install them. So we needed to do this first to purchase the materials and then move ahead with hiring someone to actually install them. The list that is attached is a list of about 50 locations. Those locations are based upon ridership, and some are locations in which we've received specific requests that we've then been able to determine that a shelter can fit in that location. We have the capacity for an additional 50 locations, and we didn't fill the list up with all 100 locations. Some to respond to other requests and to continue to look along the routes based upon ridership as ridership changes. I can answer any other questions that anyone may have.
Go ahead, Dee Dee.
So you're saying you really haven't put the list together of the other of phase two?
What you're looking at right now, Councilmember Adams, is a partial list for phase two of about 50 locations. But right. We did leave the capacity to add additional locations. What we found when we were doing phase one is that staff had already identified locations based upon ridership, but there were some other needs that were brought to our attention that we were then moving around to try to fulfill that need. So we didn't want to then fill the list up with a full 100 and not have the capacity to continue to respond to the needs as expressed by the community that we may get from council members or others. So that's why the list looks like it does.
Thank you.
Mr. McCullough, would you anticipate bringing back a second list for phase 2 when you get some more recommendations?
We can do that, yes, sir.
That'd be fine. And I understand all we're doing right now is buying the stuff, the shelter, and then we'll have another contract to install them.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Any other questions from anybody?
Yes, I have a question.
Go right ahead, Ms. Scipio.
Ms. McCullough, I had a question about where we can and cannot locate these shelters. Do they have, can they be on private property, or do they have to be on city-owned spaces? How do we go about gaining access for where they're located?
Thank you, Councilmember Scipio. We do try to place them within the right-of-way. If it's on a state road and within the right-of-way, then we need to get an encroachment agreement from NCDOT. If we find that we don't have adequate right-of-way and then we then are required to place them outside of the right-of-way, then we pursue obtaining an easement from the property owner.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Can I get a motion on C5 then?
I move for approval of consent item 5.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second on C5. I'll poll the members. Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. McIntosh?
Aye.
Mr. Clark? Aye. That is approved. Okay, we will now go to C7.
Item C7, resolution authorizing a change order to John Davenport Engineering in the amount of $155,000 for professional engineering design services associated with widening of Meadowlark Drive.
Thank you. This is in my ward, and my question to the staff, and it really has nothing to do with the specific motion, but how can I communicate in this current environment with the folks out there on what we're doing? I don't know if there's a way we can put something on our webpage and then advertise it, but if Damon, if somebody, or Mr. President, if somebody could get back to me off session and let's just talk about that. I guess ideally what I'm looking for, maybe we could videotape somebody explaining it or pointing to a map, and then somebody could come online and watch the video of it, something like that.
Yes, sir.
Other than that, I do not have an issue with it. I'm glad to see we're moving ahead. I did get your email about, well, it's actually in here on when we're going out for bids and this, that, and the other. So it all looks good to me. Since it's in my ward, I'll make a motion, we approve it.
Second.
We have a motion to second to approve C7. Anybody have any other comments? This is very specific to our ward, my ward. Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. McIntosh?
Aye.
Clark, yes, that is approved. We will now go to C10.
Item C10, resolution authorizing the city manager to approve the Federal Transit Administration fiscal year 2020, section 5307, formula funding sub-allocation or split letter for the Piedmont Authority for Regional Transportation.
Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Was this you?
Thank
Go
you.
ahead.
I think it's important, again, that we got two important transportation items in the consent agenda, but this one, item C10, we reviewed it, the mayor and Councilmember Bessie and I, in the Transportation Advisory Committee meeting this past month. But I'd like Tanique or staff to present a short presentation so people could kind of know what Section 5307 formula funding is and how important it is to our urban transportation needs. Thank you.
Ms. McCullough, can you comment on that, please?
Yes. Good evening again. The Section 5307 formula funding is an annual allocation of funding that we receive from the Federal Transit Administration. The funding is based upon formulas as each of the transit agencies within the United States report their ridership. There's a full pot of funding availability, and based upon that ridership, then it is split out to urbanized areas and also to rural areas through the state. So our allocation comes to our urban area, and the funding is split between three service providers. The three providers are the Winston-Salem Transit Authority, WISTA part, the Piedmont Area Regional Transportation, and then Davidson County Transportation. And the MPO has established a procedure in the way that they calculate the distribution of that funding, and that is based upon the ridership that is reported to FTA, and based upon the calculation that they use, then we use that same calculation to split the funding. So this item is actually a letter that PART needs in order to be able to apply directly to FTA. Davidson County and WISTA will apply together through WISTA's application, and Davidson County then serves as subrecipient to the city of Winston-Salem. The funding is used for operating expenses, some capital expenses, and also for safety items as required by FTA. I can answer any other questions that you all may have.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, go ahead, Ms. Larson.
What is JARC? J-A-R-C. What is JARC? 55,000. What is that?
Oh, I forgot about that. JARC is Job Access Reverse Commute. JARC funding, the city used to receive funding separately through a different administration, and when the administration changed to the current act, then JARC funding rolled up into 5307. So what the MPO has been doing is we pull $55,000 out directly to go to other subrecipients who provide services to riders for access to work or for school or for access to looking for work or trying to get into school. And so those are subrecipients that apply through a different process, our competitive process, and we distribute those funding to them.
So basically private contractor, transportation systems, nonprofits of some sort that take people to doctors' offices, what have you? Is that what this is?
Yes, but that's specifically to go to work or looking for work or school. There's another category of funding, the 5310, for taking individuals to doctor's appointments and things of that nature.
So we maintain a list of who these subcontractors are?
We do.
Okay.
Yes, sir. I can provide that to you.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions? Ms. McCullough, this would be a good example of why we need to fill out the census.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I think Ms. Adams was being nice, but I think that's what she was getting at. This is a good example of money that comes through from Washington that is allocated by population. And the more accurate we can be on our census, the better.
Yes.
All righty. Any other questions on C10?
I move for approval of C10.
Mr. McIntosh, can you second that?
I will second that.
Okay, I will roll call. Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Mr. McIntosh?
Aye.
Mr. Clark? Aye. That is approved. That is all the consent. I will now go to the general items, and we have, I think, 5 of them. We'll go to G1.
Item G1.
Resolution authorizing payment deferral on certain city-held lease agreements.
Okay, is Mr. Raleigh out there somewhere?
I am. Good evening, Chairman Clark.
Hello, would you like to tell us about this?
Certainly. Firstly, good evening, Chairman Clark, Mayor Joins, and members of the committee and council. I'm sure you all will probably remember last month we brought what I'll call a companion item to this, which recommended deferral for up to a 6-month period for individuals that had loans, city-issued loans that impacted about 420 loan holders. This item would provide some relief to individuals that have, to commercial entities that have leases with the city, with the for a 6-month period, with the specification being that those individuals have a lease with a term on it, so this is not eligible for folks who have month-to-month arrangements with the city, and B, this option would be open to individuals that are current on their leases as of March 20th, March of 2020, prior to the pandemic setting in. In the exhibit that you have, there is a list of entities that would be potentially eligible to receive that 6-month deferral, which would be made retroactive to April and extend through October. You can also see on that exhibit the funds that would be impacted by those deferrals. So I would be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Any questions for anyone? She said we did this with the loans we had out to individuals, and these are now the leases to various folks. And it says Exhibit A does list them. There's not that many, but it's about 8 of them.
Mr. Chairman, this is Alan.
Yes.
Just a quick comment. Obviously, one of the bigger ones on here is our baseball stadium, and no minor league play thus far. I'm not sure there will actually be a season, so I think this is a great move to give us a little time to figure that one out and not place that at least into default. So I think it's a good move, and I appreciate staff bringing it forward.
Yeah, and we have similar events. Bowman Gray Stadium's on here. They're not using it currently, and who knows if it will be. Can I get a motion on this, please?
Motion to approve.
Second. We have a motion to second on G1. Ms. Adams?
I said second.
You get to vote now.
Voting, yes.
Mr. McIntosh?
Aye.
Ms. Clark? Aye. There's a very short period between the motions and the voting. There aren't many of y'all out there. Okay, number G2. If the secretary.
Item G2, resolution authorizing establishment of a temporary COVID-19 shelter for persons who are experiencing homelessness and medically fragile, and funding to support the operation thereof.
Ms. Ford, would you like to comment on this one, or Ms. Newman?
I would, Chairman Clark, members of the committee. Item before you now addresses the medically fragile shelter that the city has been operating here in the city of Winston-Salem. I just wanted to provide a little context. The latest information that we've received from Fema reported that we have about 598, so close to 600 individuals of North Carolina that are being housed right now in non-congregate housing settings. The temporary shelter, as Ms. Newman goes through that, it has 2 dates in there that we want to make sure that we point out in terms of how long we operate our shelter. We are recommending that we operate our shelter for 90 days or until our eligibility period expires. The reason that is important is because there's 30-day windows that we receive authority to continue operating our medically fragile shelter. On May 7th, we did receive a renewal. So right now we know that that our project is eligible for reimbursement through FEMA through June 6th of 2020. So with that, I would ask Ms. Newman if she would go through the specifics of we're operating our shelter here and the cost associated with the project.
Good afternoon again, Chairman Clark, members of the committee. Some additional context as well is that we, along with the county, have both opened shelters for different purposes. The county opened a shelter for persons who have either tested positive for COVID or have test results pending for COVID. And that's a different type of shelter in a different location. The shelter that the city has set up is to protect those who are medically fragile. They have chronic health conditions or underlying conditions such that were they to be exposed to the COVID virus, they would have a poor health outcome. So I wanted to stress that none of the persons who are in the shelter that the city is operating have been diagnosed with COVID or are pending test results from COVID. So the guidance that we've received both from FEMA as well as on the CDC side has stressed the importance of providing an opportunity for persons who are medically fragile to be in a place where they could isolate themselves and be removed from the congregate settings that you have in the traditional shelters. And so that is the backdrop for setting up the shelter. As Ms. Logan Ford stated, we are currently in a position to operate the shelter for now what would be a total of 60 days. As part of the shelter setup, we currently are under contract to utilize 60 rooms at a local hotel. And as of today, 53 of those rooms are in fact occupied, and it is occupied by a combination of both men and women and 2 couples. We have an option to increase our room usage to 80, but our goal has been to just focus on truly removing those folks who would be at highest risk of a poor health outcome, and also to encourage the shelter providers to provide strong case management services so that as the shelter stands down, then those persons who are in the shelter have the opportunity to potentially transition to some permanent housing. The shelter site is operated by United Way, the Bethesda Center for the Homeless, and City with Dwellings. 3 meals a day are provided. Regular medical checkups are provided, including temperature checks to make sure that folks are COVID-free. Substance abuse and mental health counseling is made available. I've already mentioned the case management to transition from temporary shelter to permanent housing, and then additional supportive services that a particular person may need. So the case management services are often tailored to the individual needs. We are estimating that on a monthly basis, average room at an average of 60 rooms a month, the actual service providers, their fees for staffing, of course, counseling services and other support services, as well as meals, averages about $48,500 a month. The cost for the hotel for the 60 rooms is $103,000 a month. We are providing security 24 hours, 7 days a week, 2 personnel per shift, and that comes to $65,000 a month. We are also taking on the responsibility of biohazard cleaning to make sure that all of the hotel facilities that are being occupied or utilized by the shelter guests are cleaned at a higher level than what may happen traditionally in the hotel setting. And then we're also making sure that the laundry for those hotel guests are covered as well, and that's $10,000 a month. So in total, we're looking at approximately $229,500 a month to operate the medically fragile shelter. And as Ms. Logan Ford stated, that based on the information that we have received from FEMA, that Fema reimbursement is available for this service. And
questions, comments? Ms. Adams.
Yes, Councilmember Clark had a concern about the reimbursement of the money or where the money will come from. Could you be a little bit more clear on that? I got it, but for the folks listening at home, about the money from FEMA, 90 days, what happens if they cut it off early? What's the backup plan? That sort of thing.
Absolutely. So I'll start with the last question first, and that is the FEMA, each month, as Ms. Logan Ford stated, we get approval for an extension of another 30 days, for which FEMA says they will in fact provide reimbursement. We have set this up such that we are targeting being able to operate the shelter for 90 days. However, the actual length of operating the shelter will depend on when FEMA says they will not provide any further reimbursement. So whichever occurs first. If FEMA says we're cutting it off in 30 days, then in 30 days we're cutting it off. Or if we reach 90 days, although FEMA may continue, we are looking to stand down the operations because, again, part of what we're hoping to do is move people into permanent stable housing. And so a hotel, a temporary position is not a sustainable situation for the city. And so that's why we have proposed that our support of this medically fragile shelter top out at 90 days. And then in terms of what FEMA will reimburse, they specifically outlined that moving people from congregate settings to places where they can self-isolate is in fact one of their primary items that they do reimburse. And so it was having received that specific guidance in terms of a letter from FEMA, from our State Department of Health and Human Services and Emergency Management Services, that we felt comfortable moving forward with setting up the shelter because we did get direct information in writing from the state that FEMA would reimburse these costs.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions, comments from anybody? Can I get a motion then?
Oh, Mr. Chairman, this is Annette.
Theo, you have the floor.
Me? Okay.
Yes, you have the floor.
All right. I wanted to ask Ms. Newman, how successful are we, or do we believe we're going to be in moving people into a permanent, stable situation? Now that we've had 30 days of this, have we moved any people into something permanent? And is that a doable goal or reasonable expectation?
Yes, ma'am. So what we're looking at is, first, the shelter has not been open for 30 days. We've been open just a little over 2 weeks.
2 weeks. Oh, okay.
They are starting to show some success, and actually received an email a short while ago stating that one person moved out of the shelter over the weekend because a permanent placement was found. So it's a slow process. This is oftentimes a group of individuals who have challenges with finding permanent placement for a variety of reasons. So I can't say that 50% will find permanent placement or not at the end of the time, but the providers understand that the primary goal of the city is for people to have stable housing and to use this as an opportunity in conjunction with a number of waivers that HUD has issued for documentation that might be necessary to get into permanent housing and some other things. We've encouraged them to take advantage of the fact that these waivers are available and use those along with the case management to really get folks into housing. So I would be reticent to give you a percentage, but we do know that there are some people who have already started to move into permanent housing.
Okay.
And the COVID-19 emergency funds that we spoke about earlier could assist in some permanent housing relocation funding?
The CDBG, the federal money, as well as the ESG that we talked about earlier, some of those dollars are in fact going to support the transitioning into permanent housing. Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Any other? Ms.
Yes.
Theo, that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
I think it would be good, staff, 60, 90 days from now, whenever, to give the council after the fact analysis of how many people went through and this, that, and the other, so we'll have a better feel for it.
Yes, sir.
Okay, can I get a motion on?
Please. Mr. John Larson?
Oh, Mr. Larson has a question.
Quick question. How do we determine the 90 days? Who's setting that line in the sand?
The city is by virtue of the contract we have with the hotel.
Right.
With the hotel, this isn't from HUD or anybody else at this point.
No, sir.
They haven't said when they're going to stop funding us or anything like that.
No.
So we may see this being extended. I mean, we've set 700,000, which is basically 3 months of coverage. It seems kind of a artificial number, depending on what our needs are as we go forward. We're talking about going into July, really, at this point, and we may well have to go beyond that. You're telling me as long as we receive federal funding, we will keep the hotel open.
No.
Councilmember Larson, one of the conversations that we had in terms of how long we contracted to use this particular hotel with the hotelier was 90 days. We've also been having some conversations with other communities that have set up the shelters. Some of them have dates in place in terms of how long they'll operate the facilities, but we want to make sure that we are looking at all of the options and realizing that sustaining this over some long period of time, even though we will be reimbursed for the cost, we're also keeping in mind that we're still receiving reimbursements almost 2 years later from Hurricane Michael. So thinking about what it takes to fund this operation on the front end while we're still waiting for reimbursement is also something we're considering. If we're keeping our numbers where they are now, with operating this at about $230,000 a month, we could easily exceed the $1 million mark if we continue this more than 90 days. So we were trying to keep those costs in mind when we were coming up with the time frame.
So we may have 50, 60 people in 90 days that we're going to have to dislocate.
Or we would try to work on their transition plan, which would be how many can we get into permanent housing, and also having conversations with the shelters on how they may be able to absorb individuals back into the existing shelter system. And there are two other options that we have presented to the COC that we're vetting on how we can also reintegrate individuals back into the community if we're having to shut down the temporary shelter in 90 days.
Okay.
Ms. Adams, I think you had a comment?
Yes, last question or comment. Ms. Logan Ford and Ms. Newman, I would like to have for the council a somewhat shutdown plan of what's going to happen, you know what I mean, timeline, because if the money runs out and we have to shift, then I'd like to know what our relationship communication is with Continuum of Care, so far as there may be the misconception that the city will fund this until eternity. And I know that we would love to, but in a time like this and even before COVID, we had the housing crunch. We still got it. But I think we need to make sure we all on the same page so far as expectations are concerned. So there is no misunderstanding of what the city can do and is allowed to do with the assistance of the federal and state funds, okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Yeah, I would, being the finance chairman here, this is about $4,000 a month per person. You could rent a very nice apartment for a lot less than that. So there is an economic incentive to move them on as well. But I do think there's a hard 90 days in the motion, is there not?
Yes, there is.
Okay, all right. Jeff, you had a question.
It was answered. Thank you.
Okay. By the way, I am being cued on who has a question, but this is not the most efficient system in the world. Basically, Meredith's out here with her hands waving at who it is. Can I get a motion on G2 then, please?
Move for approval of G2.
Second.
We have a motion and a second on G2. We will now vote. Ms. Adams?
Aye.
Mr. McIntosh?
Aye.
Mr. Clark? Aye. That is approved. We will now go to G3. If the secretary please read that.
Item G3, resolution authorizing permanent financing for an 84-unit senior rental development known as Villas at Wilshire, located in the South Ward.
Ms. Logan Ford, you are doing the whole meeting today. Would you like to comment on this? To introduce it.
I would ask Ms. Newman if she would introduce this item to the committee.
Okay, Ms. Newman, you've been here up here all day too. Could you continue?
Yes, sir. Members of the council and committee, what we have before you is a request for basically gap financing for a 84-unit senior affordable housing development to be known as the Villas at Wilshire. And this proposed development is located in the South Ward. The request has been for the utilization of home funds for the project that have a total development cost of $12,974,510. Again, it is a development designed for affordable housing with the affordability spread across a range of incomes from at or below 30% of AMI up to 80% of AMI, basically covering 4 different income ranges for those 84 units. In addition, 9 of the units in the development are targeted to persons who either have special needs or are homeless. And then 10 of those same 84 units are also, they will also be designed for folks who are mobility impaired. There will be amenities such as a community room with a kitchen, high-speed internet, a laundry room, and storage space, and some outdoor picnic shelter and grill areas. The developer is planning to submit an application for low-income housing tax credits to the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency. That application to the Housing Finance Agency is due on Friday, May 15th. And so the request is that we be able first to agree to provide a commitment letter to the $450,000 in home funds to cover the gap that they have in the financing. And we would also discuss with the committee and then the larger council the ability to ratify a recommendation that this committee might make for the gap financing so that that application can in fact be submitted by the May 15th deadline. I should also note that this particular development has not yet been approved by the planning board. There were some staff concerns raised. However, the item is on the agenda for the planning board for rezoning purposes in June. The applicants have the opportunity to provide the zoning information by July 15th. So both items can work on separate tracks, but the primary issue is being able to get the initial commitment in. However, I should also state that in the event the rezoning request is not approved by the planning board, then our funding commitment will not be made to the development. So our commitment of funding is contingent upon ultimate planning board approval. And our money usually goes in late in the project anyway. So it's not as if we would be providing any upfront monies to get the development started. So there are some contingencies in place that must be met before we will actually disperse any funds to the project.
Thank you. Mr. McIntosh, you had a question, then Ms. Adams. McIntosh first, please. Jeff?
Yeah, let me unmute. Okay, so has this project been scored yet, or does that happen further on in the process?
For the tax credit application?
Yeah.
They made the pre-application cutoff. So okay. They were on one of those that did make it through the pre-application stage. Okay. So now they go in for the final analysis and competition for the credits.
Everybody knows kind of what the matrix looks like, and so these people are feeling fairly confident that they're going to score somewhat high. Are there other projects in the running? Because it seems like every year we have multiples, and this is the first project that I've heard that's being asked to participate in.
This is the only one that we've been asked to participate in this year. They are the only developer that have come to us. And from what we understand that generally speaking, the Housing Finance Agency doesn't fund more than 2 projects in Forsyth County this or any given year. And so we are one of 5 projects that did make it through the pre-application stage, if you will. But this is the only one of those 5 that came to the city for assistance.
Okay. Before Monday night, I'm going to vote to move this forward, but are there any renderings yet of what the building would look like? If there are, I wouldn't mind seeing those.
Okay.
And do we know anything on the history of the management group with their other projects? I usually like to try to drive to one of their other projects and take a look and see what they look like.
Okay. We'll have that. We'll have that for you.
Thanks.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, it's Alan.
Did we lose the chair?
We lose Robert?
Hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Ms. Adams is next and then the mayor.
Thank you.
Yes. I'd like to know if we have any idea what the estimated tax revenue might be on this project that we might be looking down the road. Going forward, we're going to have to look down the road at every project that comes as to what's the monetary value. And just like Councilmember McIntosh said, I know that the Wilshire Golf Course is over there. That's how I know it, and kind of near where the brewery used to be. It would be interesting to see because some of us have had a couple of, I won't call them fights, but projects that have come to the city since I've been on the council. Some of us that were turned down. Either the developers wanted them, the neighborhood didn't want them. So I'd be interested to get more information on this as well. But any additional affordable housing in our community, workforce housing, housing based on the average median income, myself and the city, we're excited. I hope that the project is all what it is. Because that would just add to our huge task of trying to bring affordable housing in this pandemic situation. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, you're next.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just sort of continuing on Councilmember Adams' train of thought there. This looks like a pretty good project vis-a-vis the ratios. It's like 28 to 1. That is, for every dollar we put in, you get $28 of private monies or equity financing in that. And it boils down to roughly $5,300 a unit and we're getting 84 units. As everybody knows, we've got a big lift in terms of creating affordable housing units here over the next 8 years or so. Ms. Newman, I was curious if the Affordable Housing Coalition has looked at this and feel like this is an appropriate use of our funds to create affordable units.
No, sir, this has not been before the Affordable Housing Coalition. They've not met since earlier in the year.
Right. I would assume that you would feel like this is a pretty good ratio, though, and a good return on investment.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Good. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Scipio, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Newman, I have a question. This entire complex is for seniors, and is the rental subsidized when you look at this unit count by medium income? So would people who had under 30%, if their medium income was $18,500, then their rental gets subsidized. Is that right?
It can be. It would not necessarily be subsidized through us or through this particular project that you have in front of you, because our money is on the construction side for GAP. But those persons could very well have the benefit of a voucher or some other type of subsidy to assist them. So they could potentially be eligible for other assistance.
Thank you.
Mr. Larson, you had a comment.
Thank you. This is in the South Ward. Like a few comments on it. It has not gone to the planning board yet. It has been out there circulating a little bit in the community. I have not had any adverse impact comments on it at all. However, I am waiting for comments in front of the planning board later this week. What we've got is sort of a timeline crunch here and application deadlines that makes it impossible for them to get the zoning done before the application deadline for the grants, the home grants from the state are available. Committing to this amount of money, consider. However, if the zoning does not approve, then the money will not be forthcoming. I think it is important to say that we know we have an incredible housing shortage. We all have that knowledge of that. 84 units. Workforce housing, the ratios are excellent as far as median income ratios. It's a $13 million project. The problem that staff seems to be having with it predominantly, and I don't know if we'll certainly hear about this. This will come back to council as a rezoning request. But they have some problems with the location predominantly in the area plan. And we're sort of trying to work through that right now. But I'm leaning obviously in favor of it, but I have not heard from the public yet.
Anyone else would like to comment on it? So it sounds like it's got to get planning staff and the planning staff, the planning board, and the city council have to approve the zoning. They have to, I guess, win the contest to get the funding. And all this is moving all at the same time.
Basically it.
All right. Can I get a motion then, please?
Motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve. What are we on, C3? Our roll call, Ms. Adams?
Aye.
Mr. McIntosh?
Aye.
Mr. Clark? Aye. That is approved. We will now go to G4.
Item G4, presentation.
Fiscal year 2019, 2020, year-ended estimates for the general fund budget.
Ms. Tony, are you out there, or Mr. Rao? Who's?
I'm here.
All right, you have the floor.
Okay, good afternoon, Mayor Jones, Chairman Clark, members of the Finance Committee and Council.
Good afternoon.
Okay, I would like to give you an update on the current year budget and how we project to end given the impact of COVID-19. And I'll also provide a budget overview, a preview of what we're looking at for the FY21 budget. But the actual proposed budget will be available on May 21st. Just as a reminder, there will be a major economic impact from COVID-19. As you all are aware, there are millions of people who have filed unemployment claims in the last 7 to 8 weeks. The unemployment rate nationally is approaching 17, sometimes 20% on the national level, what we're hearing. The GDP is declining. Consumer confidence is uncertain. The market is volatile, and so there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of people's spending and the economic impact. The one positive is the federal stimulus. There's been expanded unemployment benefits. People are receiving stimulus checks. There's been some small business relief and an early tax credit. So on a national level, this has a huge impact, and obviously it trickles down to us, and we will certainly feel the impact to COVID-19. So looking at our property tax base, this chart shows the property tax base growth from fiscal year to fiscal year. Looking at year end for FY20, we're looking at a $23 billion in our tax base. And then projecting out to FY21, we're looking at $23.1 billion. So percentage of growth for the current year end, we initially were looking at a 2.5% growth in our tax base. But after COVID hit, our new projections, and basically we're taking what the Forsyth County Tax Office has issued on May 1st, and that growth is 0.6% growth in the tax base. So that is a significant difference in what we were planning and estimating prior to COVID-19. On the local option sales tax side, you can also see a decline in what we were initially estimating and then how we were projecting to end this current year of 2020. The new projection for FY21 is 35 million. So you can see the decrease from our March estimate to our FY21 projection in sales tax. This slide shows our general fund balance. This is really important to show as we have a general fund balance for our reserve of 14%. In hard economic times, we have to use some level of reserve. You can see how we ended last year, June 30th of 2019, our actual. And then looking forward to June, how we're going to end this current year in terms of fund balance, the second column, you'll notice that the light purple area, that is our unrestricted reserve. And so we went from 13.2% and we're down to 10.2% use of reserve. And so our appropriated fund balance will be $5.4 million. So our year-end estimate is, on the expenditure side, is $210.5 million. For revenues was $207.9 million. So that is why we're using $2.6 million of fund balance in this current year. And that is obviously driven primarily by sales tax, reduction in our sales tax revenue from April, May, and June. So this is our big picture slide. This shows our entire budget, everything that we would have projected to budget for the upcoming fiscal year. I'll point out just the total on the revenue side is $207 million, 3% reduction from current year. And then on the expenditure side, we're looking at $220 million expenditures. So that gives us a $13.4 million gap. We're looking at all expenditures and our current revenue. So how do we plan to close the $3.4 million gap? Well, this slide just shows some proposed methods to close the gap. We were looking at eliminating the 2% merit for all employees, postponing the increase of the minimum hourly wage. Current minimum wage for city employees is $13 an hour. We're proposing to eliminate 20 vacant positions, eliminate public safety supplement, reduce IS charges, eliminate a transfer to the parking fund, eliminate equipment replacement only to the most critical. So we have a little bit, but just very minimal. And then we have some uncommitted economic development revenues, and that's $4 million. So that is a significant to help us balance the budget. That is from the sale of the Neeson building. And the additional use of fund balance, Right now, $3.3 million. And so that's how we are projecting to close the $13.4 million gap. Over the next week or so, we will refine this list. And so you'll see that when we present the proposed budget. But the main principles, budget principles that the city manager's office has given us as we look at balancing is that we protect our existing employees. That is one thing. So nothing in this proposal will, it does not include reducing actual field positions. So all the positions that will be eliminated will be vacant. This does not include any new programs or any enhancements to our current level of services. And then we want to minimize the impact to current services. So the current fiscal year, we were asked how does COVID-19 impact our other funds? What you heard me talk about previously was the general fund, but we have many other funds. Occupancy tax is one of those funds. At the end of this year, that fund will be nearly depleted. There was a 25% reduction in occupancy tax receipts. For the debt service, there's minimal impact. The revenues in FY19 were higher than expected, so that helps offset potential decreases in revenue for FY20, this current year. Refinancing of debt issues in FY20 have decreased further debt service expenses. For WISTA, you're aware that we were eligible for up to $12.4 million in the CARES Act funds. On the stormwater side, stormwater revenues are trending down by 3.5% less than last year, but at this point, there's no material effect on the fund due to COVID-19. For water and sewer, the projected revenues are estimated to be $5 million less than budget. A lot of that is due to late fees. Debt service expenses are decreased due to refinancing of debt, and operations are expected to be less than budget. So staff will continue to monitor the revenues and adjust the capital spending as needed. For fairgrounds, there is a projected use of about $500,000 in revenue. This is mainly due to a subsidy to Bowman Gray. It's nearly $300,000. There's a 25% estimated reduction in Carolina Classic Fair looking towards FY21. So that's for the upcoming fair this year. So in the budget, we're looking at a 25% reduction due to COVID. Okay, so that is just a brief preview and update from the last budget update that I've given. This slide shows our budget review calendar. So all of the budget review workshops will be done via WebEx, starting with Thursday, May 21st, will be the official presentation of the proposed budget to the mayor and council. On Thursday, May 28th, we'll review community agencies during the workshop, and we'll also have a public hearing. On Thursday, June the 4th at 4 o'clock, there'll be a Finance Committee budget workshop where we will consider a recommended budget and a property tax rate, which there's no proposed tax rate increase at this time. And then on Monday, June the 15th at 7 o'clock, there will be the budget adoption after the second public hearing.
So in addition to our normal Finance Committee meeting, we will have a Thursday, the May 28th, and a Thursday, June 4th.
Yes.
And I guess somewhere in there in June is a committee meeting. I don't know what day that would be. Don't have a calendar. Okay.
And that'll give us a backup opportunity if you need more time to discuss the budget.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Any questions, comments from anybody? bad news kind of gets everybody quiet.
Ouch.
Ms. Tony, thank you very much. I think it's going to be a challenging year, and I hope we can keep everybody employed and not have a tax increase. If we can keep between those two parameters, I think we'll be doing a very good job.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, folks. Jeff, you have a comment, I see.
Yeah, comment question. I know Dee Dee on the national level with the National League of Cities and me with North Carolina League of Municipalities. We're trying to read tea leaves on whether there's going to be any revenue coming from the federal government to ease this pain somewhat. I guess I just would look to ask between, as we go along, to talk about what the strategy is to, if that money comes in, where would we use it first? What are our highest priorities if we're going to get reimbursement to cover some of the revenue gap that we're all going to see? So just a comment about future information I'd like to see.
Okay. Patrice, let's keep that in mind. And this thing could go on a while, being the pandemic, so that money may come in at any time. It can come in next year, who knows? Any other questions, comments? Okay, with that, Mr. Taylor, I think your committee, are you meeting today
Yes.
at 6 o'clock?
Public safety will be meeting today at 6 o'clock, so we're right on
Okay,
time.
public safety is meeting at 6 o'clock, and that is in 15 minutes, so you can sign off and come back on. Thank you all very much. We are adjourned.
Thank you.